I could tell of the story, how the thousands were fed, how he lifted the sick and raised up the dead. I could sing of the others, like the blind made to see. Oh, but I'd rather tell you what happened to me.
Amen.
Once I was lost, but now I am found. The work of life, my name's written down, and now I'm part of the family of the child of the King. And this is my story, my song to sing. I'm saved to the uttermost.
Amen.
Now you must be forgiven to make heaven your home. The good life you're living won't do it alone. Stand trust in the Savior, and He'll save you today. With blessed assurance, you too can say.
Boy, I like that song there. Saved to the uttermost. Man, I sing that in church all the time. Love it, gets your spirits all happy and everything. This one was sung by the Pleasant View Baptist Church. And once again, I've said many times before, I'm not affiliated to any denomination today. I don't think the church should be divided. And the reason that happened is if you know any church history, when they come out of the Catholic Church, this group believes this group believe this, and ain't none of them right to divide the Word of God. And that's where we get all these different denominations and everything. Everybody believes something different. It ought not be that way. If right divided the Scripture, then it wouldn't be that way. But I don't want to spend too much time on that. To be saved today, if you want to have your eternal destination to be in the heavenlies, you have to believe that you're a sinner, whether it be one sin or many. And if you're honest, most of us, if you're honest, would say we've sinned many times. We've done things we know weren't right, whether it be against the Ten Commandments or against our parents. Well, what's in the Ten Commandments? We've all done something wrong. And until you admit that, you can't be saved, because Jesus Christ came to save sinners. That means those that acknowledge that they've sinned. And when you believe that Jesus Christ bore all of those sins, in which the Bible says he did, and he took those sins to the cross, now about almost 2,000 years ago, but took those sins to the cross, and he died in your place, he died in my place, because the wages of sin is death, Romans 6:2-3, we learned that. And he was buried, and he was risen for our justification. So we believe in that work, and because it's his work and not our own, we can say that we're saved, and we can't lose that, because it wasn't something we done to begin with. It's something that we trust, and that won't change. Okay, that's how we can know that we're saved. Thank goodness it's not based on my behavior at any time. other than the acknowledgement of my sin. So that's the gospel. Romans, I want to get Romans. 1 Corinthians 15 verses 1 through 4. You can see the gospel there if you want to look at that. All right. Let's see. I think that's all I wanted to say about that. I like that song. So we're gonna finish up verses 9 through 15 tonight and tomorrow night, and I'm gonna go ahead and read that here, and get your King James Bible, and I'm gonna start reading from verse 9. And thy mighty men, O Teman, shall be dismayed, to the end that every one of the mount of Esau may be cut off by slaughter. For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. In the day that thou stoodest on the other side, in the day that the strangers carried away captive his forces, and foreigners entered into his gates, and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou wast as one of them. So the Edomites were assisting their enemies in their endeavors against Jerusalem and all that. But thou shouldest not have looked on the day of thy brother in the day that he became a stranger, neither shouldest thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction, neither shouldest thou have spoken proudly in the day of distress. Thou shouldest not have entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Yea, thou shouldest not have looked on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor have laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. Neither shouldest thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those of his that did escape. Neither shouldest thou have delivered up those of his that did remain in the day of distress. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen. As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head. Oh, that's a good brother for you. Esau, i.e. the son of Edomites, the brother of Jacob and Israel, Judah, Jerusalem. He was helping his enemies, not allowing them to escape, and help and taking their stuff. Oh my gosh, what kind of brother is that? But I'm gonna get out the way and let Justin Johnson take the class. I'm right back here watching along with you. See you in just a little bit.
Open your Bibles to Obadiah, and we'll proceed in our verse by verse. We're in Obadiah verse 8 and 9 tonight. We're going to cover down to verse 15. This is our third lesson, and if you recall the first lesson we had, we dealt with the map and just dealt with some preliminaries of where Edom was at, Obadiah being a prophecy against Edom. And we dealt with the fact that Edom was Esau. It says that very plainly in Genesis 36 and other places. And so we understand that Edom was the country coming from Esau, just like Israel was the country coming from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Last week we dealt with the first 8 verses, and we learned how the topic of Obadiah here is God's curse and his judgment against Edom. And of course the question we're trying to figure out is why is he pouring out his judgment on Edom? Why is he have this curse, this hatred for Edom, this hatred for Esau, as he says in Malachi 1 verse 2 and in Romans 9:13. And so tonight is the answer to that question. We'll wrap up our Obadiah study next week, and so tonight we'll cover the verses that actually answer why God has declared this curse against Esau. And so the first 8 verses deal clearly with that. And we finished in verse 8 and 9 last week, when it says, "Shall I not in that day, saith the Lord, even destroy the wise men out of Edom, and understanding out of the mount of Esau? And thy mighty men, O Teman," Teman being a city in Edom, "shall be dismayed, to the end that every one of the mount of Esau may be cut off by slaughter." And so what a graphic, what a very judgmental verse. Everyone in the mount of Esau and Edom is going to be cut off, they're going to be killed. Okay, why? Why is God doing this? And so starting with verse 10, we see the answer why. But before we go there, I want to just do a quick review in Jeremiah 49, when we covered last week, that the first 4 or 5 verses in Obadiah are repeated in Jeremiah 49, as Jeremiah gives prophecy after prophecy against the nations who opposed Israel. Jeremiah 49, it's Edom's turn. So in Jeremiah 49, verse 13 specifically, God says, I have sworn by myself, saith the Lord, that Bozrah, that's the capital city in Edom, shall become a desolation, a reproach, a waste, and a curse. And all the cities thereof shall be perpetual wastes. And then in verse 14, he starts out with Obadiah verse 1. I have heard a rumor from the Lord, an ambassador sent to the heathen. Let's go to battle against Edom. And so that's Obadiah 1, 2, 3, and 4, the next few verses there. But notice the swear, the promise God has made in Jeremiah 49, 13, that Bozrah, Edom, will be a reproach, a waste. It's very clear from the first 8 verses in Obadiah and verses like this that God had an intention to punish, to seek justice with Edom for something. Okay? And so that's what we studied last week. And the question we're going to answer tonight in verse 10 of Obadiah is, why did God change from blessing Esau, which was his original intent, when he gave the prophecy that we covered 2 weeks ago about Jacob and Esau, and saying that the elder Esau would serve Jacob, and of course if he did so, he would be blessed, because everyone who blesses Abraham's seed is blessed, and everyone who curses Abraham's seed is cursed. And so if he would have blessed Jacob, his younger brother, then there would have been no problem. Why did God then change from his intention to bless Esau, to give him a land? Remember in Deuteronomy chapter 2, God said that I've given the land of Edom to Esau. And in Deuteronomy 23, he made a law to Israel and said, do not think evil thoughts, don't abhor the Edomites, because they're your brothers. Remember that? So God was teaching Israel not to curse Esau and the Edomites. And here's God, and he's giving a curse, a judgment against the Edomites. What changed with God? Okay? Now we know, of course, in Hebrews it says that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and forever. God never changes. And yet when we operate in time, we operate in the progression of history, the way God deals with humanity does change. Okay? So it shouldn't be a thing that we define God entirely by his judgment verses, or define God entirely by his love verses. Okay, these are different reactions, responses, and dealings that God has with humanity throughout time. And so, again, it's important for us to understand, why is God saying this? Why is he saying it then? Why is he saying it to these people? And that's studying the context there. Okay? So in Obadiah verse 10, notice here the very clear answer on why God says that he's going to cut off the mount of Esau by slaughter. Verse 10 says, for thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. So there's the clear answer of Romans 9:13, Malachi 1:2, and Obadiah. Why does God hate Esau? Why does he promise to curse? Why does he swore by himself to make Edom a desolation? Because of the violence against his brother Jacob. Okay, that's the reason why. Remember the promise that God gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? In thee all the nations of the world will be blessed, and if they bless you, you'll be blessed. If they curse you, they'll be cursed. Well, what we see here is not an apathetic people who are just sitting back waiting to see if Israel does have the true God, or a people who are just nice to their neighbors with Israel. With the Edomites throughout history, we're going to learn tonight that they actively resisted, cursed, attacked, and opposed Israel. Okay, they had malice against them. And they intentionally they rejoiced in their destruction. Okay, and so they were the enemies where they should have been. One of the closest nations to them being the brother of Jacob. Okay. And rather it was the opposite. So for thy violence, and there was violent things they did against Israel. That is why God has promised to himself to punish these people. Okay? So there's a reason to it. We need to remember always that the judgment of God, the sayings of God, the doings of God are always righteous. Romans chapter 2 says that we know that God judges according to righteousness. Okay? So if you don't understand why God made a statement, made a judgment, you need to figure out the reason. Okay, and if you don't know, maybe it's not for you to know. But God is right, and we aren't necessarily privy to all the details. So in Obadiah 10, we learn here it's because of the violence of Esau against Jacob. Now, verse 11, it says, in the day that thou stoodest on the other side, in the day that the strangers carried away captive his forces, and foreigners entered into his gates, and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou wast as one of them. And so he's describing an event that's happened here. So again, it's not just that God randomly says, I'm going to hate you, Esau. That's not the God of the Bible. Okay? God wants to see all men saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. And these people resisted God's will. They resisted God's purpose in time past. And in verse 12, it says, thou shouldest not have looked on the day of thy brother on the day that he became a stranger. Neither shouldest thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. Neither shouldest thou have spoken proudly in the day of distress. Thou shouldest not have entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Notice there the phrase, my people. Just to remind ourselves that Israel was not just another nation on the earth. This was the only nation that God was working through. They were his nation. He birthed them, he created them, and they were his people. And so as people dealt with Israel, they dealt with God. Okay? And so it says in verse 13, thou shouldest not have entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Yea, thou shouldest not have looked on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor have laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. Neither shouldest thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those of his that did escape. Neither shouldest thou have delivered up those of his that did remain in the day of distress. And so what you see are some very specific things that they did. He details what they did. This is not a vengeance, uncontrolled vengeance, just a capricious anger directed at these people. There's a reason why. God is a just God. He declares the sentence, he declares the judgment, and then he performs it. Okay? And so what we see is very specific events, that in the day of Israel's calamity and their destruction, Edom pillaged them. Okay, they ravished them. They stole everything they had. They beat them into the ground, and they did not show mercy. And we'll see verses explaining the events in Israel's history where Edom was involved in doing this, and even the prophecies about the future where Edom will come up again in involvement in confederacy against Israel. Okay, and so then in verse 15, then it says, the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen. As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head. And so the essence of God's judgment of men according to their works is that as you've done it, so you'll get it back. It's a very religious concept. Most religions of the world have that type of idea, that karmic idea where, you know, I should get back what I do. Well, that'd be a righteous judgment. Let's evaluate how you do. And that'd be where you lead people through the law and say, well, let's see how good you really are. But people don't want to hold themselves up to God's standard. They'd rather hold themselves up to their own standard. But God here is judging based on what they did. Okay, and he says, how you did it, it'll be done unto you. Okay, and so with that, having read through the passage, let's go back and see some of the details and try to fill some of this out. Now back in Obadiah verse 10, where it says that the violence against thy brother Jacob, okay, you have to remember that Obadiah is a prophet, written, of course, long after Jacob and Esau are both dead. He is not talking here necessarily about Esau, the person, and any violence he did towards Jacob, the person. And we went back there a couple weeks ago and studied Jacob and Esau and when they were born and the issues there. And we remember back in Genesis 27, verse 36, when Jacob tricked Esau and Isaac to get the blessing. And remember Esau's response to that. Remember, he didn't like the fact that Esau tricked not only him out of his birthright, but out of his blessing. Now, of course, we saw in more detail there that it wasn't just something where Esau just wasn't smart enough to figure it out. Esau despised his birthright, okay, the birthright being his rightful inheritance. The inheritance that was given to Abraham and Isaac was going to be given to somebody from Isaac's seed, Jacob or Esau there in the running, Esau being the firstborn, and Esau despised his birthright. He knew about what God promised to Abraham and Isaac, and he despised it, didn't want it. He sold it for a meal. So there's more to that birthright than just saying, you can be the firstborn. He knew that there was a responsibility and an access to God that was given to his forefathers that he just didn't care about. We saw that later when God told Abraham and Isaac not to marry among the Canaanites, right? Because that would be the land they would possess. Esau didn't care. He started marrying some Canaanites. He didn't care. He despised the birthright and God's purpose that he had revealed to Abraham and Isaac. And so because of that, he said, you can have it, Jacob, I don't care. And then later, when it comes time for Isaac to die, and he's going to give some riches, Esau's right there and he's wanting it. But of course, Jacob usurps that at the time. In Genesis 27:36, here's Esau, and he says, is not he rightly named Jacob? For he hath supplanted me. Jacob means supplanter. These 2 times he took away my birthright, and behold, now he hath taken away my blessing. And he said, hast thou not reserved a blessing for me? And so he begs his father to give him a second blessing here. And Isaac does, because he loves Esau, gives him a blessing. And yet the blessing contains in it the prophecy that God had said before they were born, which is that you're going to serve your younger brother. You're going to have great land, you're going to have great people, many nations will come from you, you'll be prosperous, and you're going to serve your brother Jacob. And it wasn't the fact that he was promised prosperity that made him upset, it's the fact that he was going to serve Jacob that made him furious. So down in verse 41, Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, then will I slay my brother Jacob. And so he had purposed in his heart, verse 42, to kill his brother after Isaac died. Okay? Because of that, of course, you know the story. Jacob flees, and he goes, and God comes to him personally and gives him the vision, the promise, and the covenant that he gave to his fathers. And so it wasn't all in Isaac's blind eyes and hands that passed that along. God himself chose Jacob. Okay? He chose him before they were even born. And yet it was Esau who chose to hate that purpose. It was Esau that chose to hate the fact that God chose Jacob, and to hate Jacob for it. Okay? And so that's what you saw back there. But even then, if you go and read through Genesis, you'll find that eventually Esau becomes, his people multiply, his flock multiplies, his country multiplies, and Jacob at one point comes and bows down to Esau, calling him Lord, saying, can we live with you for a while? If you read on in Genesis. And they hug each other, and they kiss each other, and they weep over each other. So you see some of that malice go away. But that's not the reason why Obadiah is written. The reason why Obadiah is written is not because Esau back there individually was going to punch Jacob in the face. Okay? Obadiah is written about the people of Esau and what the people, the country, did over and over again to Jacob's people. Okay? To Israel, to God's people. All right? And so this is not about God. I put on the outline there. It's not about a hedge of protection, which is a Christian saying that comes from Job verse 1 or chapter 1. When God put a hedge, Satan says God put a hedge around Job. This is not just where God's putting a hedge of protection around Jacob, and so Esau and the Edomites can't touch him, or else they're going to get stung. That's not it. Okay, this is God's people and God's purpose that is being performed. And Esau and the Edomites, the house of Esau, are against God's purpose, and we'll see that here in the next few verses. Okay, so that's what's going on. The proper response, by the way, back with Esau specifically, the proper response to Jacob receiving the promise should have been that of the honorable king Abimelech back in Genesis 26:24. You know, Jacob, the young pup, when he got on his own and started his own family and had his own flocks and everything else, he was traveling around in tents. And Abimelech was in one part of the country he was traveling in. And at one point, Abimelech kicked his people out of their land because he didn't want them there. He didn't like them. Okay, they were causing trouble, causing division. They kicked him out, so you got to leave. Okay, and yet in Genesis 26, after this happened, God appeared to Jacob, and or rather Isaac here in Genesis 26:24. The Lord appeared unto him, and the same night said, I am the God of Abraham thy father. This is Isaac, rather. Fear not, I am with thee, and will bless thee, and multiply thy seed for my servant Abraham's sake. And he built an altar there, and called upon the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servants digged a well. So you had this time where Abimelech told Isaac to leave. God appears to Isaac. He says, I'm going to bless thee. He gives him a promise. And apparently God speaks to Abimelech as well. And so Abimelech has the knowledge that God has chosen Isaac to be the one to fulfill his purpose. And verse 26, then Abimelech went to him from Gerar, and Ahazath, one of his friends, and that guy, the chief captain of his army. And Isaac said unto them, wherefore come ye to me? So he's got his commander and his military captain here, and he's got one of his friends and the king. And Isaac's saying, why are you coming to me, seeing ye hate me? You see that? Why are you coming to me, saying ye hate me, and have sent me away from you? Abimelech kicked Isaac out, said, I don't like you guys, you need to leave. Okay? He says, why are you coming if you hate me? And they said in verse 28, we saw certainly that the Lord was with thee. And we said, let there be now an oath betwixt us, even betwixt us and thee, and let us make a covenant with thee, that thou wilt do us no hurt, as we have not touched thee, and as we have done unto thee nothing but good, and have sent thee away in peace. Thou art now the blessed of the Lord. So Abimelech didn't fight with him, he just sent him away. But now Abimelech knows that God has chosen this guy, and God's with him. So Abimelech comes to him and says, hey, let's have a covenant of peace here. I don't want to be against the Lord's blessed one. Okay? Now Abimelech was older than Isaac. Okay, Abimelech, he's been around. Isaac doesn't even have his own territory. And yet he's coming to him and blessing Isaac. See, that's the proper response. Even though Abimelech, whatever personal feelings he would have had, whatever personal incentives he would have had to kick Isaac out, Isaac even thought he hated him. Abimelech says, you're God's guy. You're God's man. And so let's have a covenant here. And so in verse 30, it says he made them a feast, and they did eat and drink, and they rose up and they departed, and they had peace. Okay, that's how Esau should have responded. That's how everyone should respond when they hear that, hey, God's doing this. Your response should be, let's get on board. Okay? Even if it's your younger brother that God's working through, you should be like, well, you must be God's man. I'm going to bless you and get the blessing from God. Right? Instead, he opposed it, and it was that pattern that you see reoccur in Esau's children. Okay? So Obadiah and his prophecy and his curse against Esau, against Edom, is not about Esau individually. Okay, it's about the country and the people. We need to make that clear. God does not hold the sins of the parents against the children, and does not hold the sins of the children against the parents. He judges each of us and accountable individually. He's always done that. Okay, so God is a just God, to be unjust to do anything less. And so he's not here talking about cursed is everyone that's an Edomite. Okay, there's a judgment coming on them for actions that they've done. All right. There could be Edomites, there could be people in Esau's history that would bless Israel and they'd get a blessing. And yet here we see these Edomites in the events in verses 12, 13, and 14 of Obadiah, that they did counter to that. Okay, so let's study some of these events. There's specific events in Israel's history whereby Israel was attacked, and each time by a confederacy of other nations, and Edom was constantly in the leadership of these confederacies, leading the charge against Israel. And so Esau's children would resist, they would curse, they would attack Israel, which would be Jacob. Now, let's turn to Numbers chapter 20. We're going to start our journey through Israel's history here in Numbers 20. Now, the book of Numbers starts out pretty dry and boring. That's the part that you probably skip. But Numbers, once you get past all the numbers, really has some great stuff in it. Has some great lessons in it.
Use yourself by adding up the numbers.
Well, yeah, that's just a waste of time. But Numbers chapter 20, in verse 14, here is the event where Moses has delivered Israel, Jacob's children, from Egypt. They've come through the wilderness. They've crossed the Red Sea, and God has promised them the promised land. They received the Ten Commandments by this point, and so God is preserving them and protecting them through the wilderness. And now they're going to head up into the promised land. If you remember our map last week, the promised land was north of Edom, and so they were going to travel through Edom. That'd be the shortest way. In fact, there's a highway called the King's Highway to this day that goes on the east side of the Dead Sea through Edom, and then crosses the River Jordan into Jerusalem from the east. Okay, that's the same path in your Bible that the Lord Jesus Christ will take in his return. He'll go up the King's Highway, conquering his enemies as he goes, cross the River Jordan, right in Jerusalem from the east. Okay, it's the same path. And this is the way the nation of Israel was taking back in the wilderness. And so they come to Edom in Numbers 20, and yet here begins the refusal of Esau's children to give charity to Israel. All right. So in verse 14, Moses sent messengers from Kadesh and the king of Edom. Thus saith my brother Israel, thou knowest all the travail that hath befallen us, how our fathers went down into Egypt. We dwelt in Egypt a long time. The Egyptians vexed us and our fathers. And when we cried to the Lord, he heard our voice and sent an angel. That'd be Moses. And hath brought us forth out of Egypt. And behold, we are in Kadesh, a city in the uttermost of thy border. So we're right here. We just need to pass through. Just let us go through. It'll be a lot shorter, a lot easier for us to get where we're going this way. And so in verse 17, let us pass, I pray thee, through thy country. We will not pass through the fields or through the vineyards, neither will we drink of the water of the wells. We will go by the king's highway. We will not turn to the right hand nor to the left until we have passed thy borders. And Edom said unto him, thou shalt not pass by me, lest I come out against thee with the sword. What a reception. He not only said no, he said, if you dare step a foot on my land, I'll kill you. Okay? Wow. So apparently, there's some hatred here in the country with the king of Edom against Israel. Okay? And no doubt, like many other cultural hatreds even today, it's because of their heritage. And the people of Edom saw that Jacob stole their birthright and stole Esau's right from God, and so they wanted to kill them. So in verse 19, the children of Israel said unto him, we will go by the highway. We're not even going to go into your land. He says, and if I and my cattle drink of thy water, then I will pay for it. I will only, without doing anything else, go through on my feet. And he said, thou shalt not go through. And Edom came out against him with much people. So he said no again. And then Edom brings out his army. He says, you want to fight? And they're just trying to get through the country. Okay? So he came out against him with much people with a strong hand. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through his border, wherefore Israel turned away from him. Okay, and so this is the first account here where we see some hostility against Jacob from Edom, from Esau. Now, nothing comes of this. Israel turns around, of course, and instead of going through the king's highway, they have to go all the way around Edom into the wilderness and clear out to the east. And of course, a lot of things happen in that time where they struggle to find water, they struggle to find food, but they go the long way, and then they go into the promised land. But nothing really happened between Edom and Israel, except we see here the start of hostility. Okay, and so with that, let's move to 2 Chronicles chapter 21. What we see, and we're moving way ahead of the future in 2 Chronicles 21, is that Israel eventually gets into the land that God promised them, and through Joshua and through the judges and through David, they conquered the people in the land, and they began to reign in that land, and they became so prosperous that they conquered the countries around the land that we saw before. On the right side was the Moabites and the Ammonites and the Edomites. They conquered all of them, and they became their servants, just like the law and the promise said would happen. Okay, and so in the time of King David, even David went in and killed all the males in Edom because of the violence they did unto Israel, and made them their servants. Okay, and so the time we get 2 Chronicles 21, this is a time where, the time of the kings in Israel, where they've had a country for quite a while, and they are past the height of their dominion, and all of the surrounding nations, the Moabites, the Edomites, the Ammonites, are servants to them. And yet Israel's on the decline. Because if you studied the kings, if you studied the history of Israel, after David, after Solomon, it just went downhill. And kings got worse and worse and worse, and you had the division between the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes, and so Israel, the country, had a civil war that split, and so this is where we're at in 2 Chronicles chapter 21. And so with that, we're going to read verse, let's see here, 5, about the King Jehoram, the wicked King Jehoram here. Jehoram was 32 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem, and he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, which is to say, he walked against God. The kings of Israel had a history of walking against God, not doing his law. So it says, like as did the house of Ahab, not exactly a role model of kings. For he had the daughter of Ahab to wife, and so his father-in-law was Ahab. And he wrought that which was evil in the eyes of the Lord. Howbeit the Lord would not destroy the house of David because of the covenant that he had made with David. So this is the king of Judah. Okay? And as he promised to give a light to him and his sons forever. And in his days, in the days of Jehoram, the Edomites revolted from under the dominion of Judah and made themselves a king. Okay? Now again, know what's going on here. God had promised his people a land. They got the land. They were ruling over people around their land. And here are people under their rule, which no doubt probably wasn't the best rule, but it's still the rule of God's people. All right? And they're revolting against it. Okay, this is not such as like the Americans would revolt against their mother country, England, who was not God's country, okay, and we want to be independent. That's not what's going on here. They were being ruled by God's people, so indirectly by God. Now, if the king of Israel was wicked, that's something God would deal with, okay, the king answering unto God alone. But the Edomites here, always having the hostility against Israel, saw the time to revolt, and they did. So they revolted, and we'll see later it's with violence, and they made themselves a king. And so they declared their own independence from, again, God's nation. All right? If God were ruling in a nation today, I would want to be a part of it, or at least associated with it. And yet these people don't. You see, they're constant resistance against this. And so they revolt against the dominion of Judah. And if we drop down to verse 16, look what happens when the Edomites resist Israel. What happens a little bit later here is that it says here the Lord stirred up against Jehoram the spirit of the Philistines, and he does this in response to Jehoram's wickedness. But he stirs up the spirit of the Philistines and of the Arabians that were near the Ethiopians, and they came up into Judah and brake into it and carried away all the substance that was found in the king's house, and his sons also, and his wives, so that there was never a son left to him. save Jehoahaz, the youngest of his sons. And after all this, the Lord smote him in his bowels with an incurable disease. That's the king of Judah. And so you see in verse 16 and 17 a glimpse of what happened here. You have to read the words very carefully because it says they carried away all the substance. They killed all the children. They wiped them out. Okay? Now what we read here in 2 Chronicles 21 is just a quick overview of a huge event in Israel's history, which we'll see here in a little bit. Because what's going on was Israel had a dominion. They had a reign. And now these people who are serving them are revolting and leading the revolt of their enemies against them, and they've taken away everything from the king's house. Now that's quite an attack, that they go into the king's house. Because that's like the White House in our country, right? This is not like you just walk up and you break the security code and you're in. This was the king of Judah. Okay, they ransacked Israel's king. Okay, or Judah's king specifically, but the king of Israel. Look at Psalm chapter 83. Psalm 83. Now we turn to Psalm 83, which we read last week briefly, but we need to draw our attention to it again here because what we see here is some insight to what happened in 2 Chronicles 21. It wasn't just that the Edomites revolted and the Philistines came and attacked, just bad times for Israel. There was an intentional plot to destroy Israel, led by the Edomites. And we see this in Psalm 83. Okay, Edomites among other people. In Psalm 83, verse 1. Now, Psalm 83 has underneath its title there a song or psalm of Asaph. Do you see that in your Bible? This is not a psalm written by David. And yet Asaph was contemporary with David, at least generally speaking. So Asaph was, of course, before, or Asaph was around the time here of the Chronicles. Okay? And so Asaph wrote this psalm before, if I can say that, before Israel. I need to pause so we're not confused. It was written before Israel was taken captive by the Babylonians. If you know Israel's history, when Jerusalem was destroyed entirely, and they were taken away captive to Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel and the lion's den and all that, before that happened, Asaph wrote these psalms. Okay? And so Psalm 83 is not talking about Jerusalem's destruction and the captivity of Israel being taken away into Babylon. All right? It hasn't happened yet. In Psalm 83, verse 1, Asaph writes, "Keep not thou silence, O God, hold not thy peace, be not still, O God, for lo, thine enemies have a tumult, and they that hate thee have lift up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent, they are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites of Moab, and the Hagarenes, Gebal, and Ammon, and Amalek, and the Philistines, and the inhabitants of Tyre." And so you see there a bunch of Arabians and the Philistines, just like you see in 2 Chronicles 21. And yet here we read that they're confederate. They've consulted together, and their purpose is to, it says, cut them off from being a nation. Okay? We don't want them to be a nation anymore. They're resisting God's nation. Okay? And so that's what's going on in Psalm 83. Drop down to verse 12. And so their enemies here in verse 12 says, "Let us take to ourselves the houses of God in possession." The plan was we're going to attack them, destroy them being a nation, and their plan was going to begin by taking in possession the houses of God. And they go there, and it says in 2 Chronicles 21, they take everything out of the house. They take it all, they kill all their children, so there's nothing left in the house. In fact, in 2 Chronicles 21, there was nobody left to reign. They destroyed it. Okay, they destroyed all the children, they've taken all the stuff, how are they going to reign? And in 2 Chronicles 22, it says that there was just a child there that became king in chapter 22 of 2 Chronicles. And so God always preserves a remnant and keeps his promises. But you see in Psalm 83 there that the Edomites and the Philistines and all of them join in confederacy against God's people, and they did it to destroy them as a nation. Look at Amos chapter 1. The book of Amos, unlike Obadiah, unlike some other prophets, gives us a date in which it was written. The book of Amos in chapter 1 verse 1, it says, "The words of Amos, who was among the herdmen of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah." Uzziah is around 2 Chronicles 26, which is 5 chapters after our event in 2 Chronicles 21, where the Philistines, Arabians, and the Edomites come and destroy Jerusalem. Okay, so Amos chapter 1, if you drop down to verse 6, Amos is prophesying against the enemies of God's people. And says, "Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4 I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they carried away captive the whole captivity to deliver them up to Edom." Do you see what it says there? So he's talking here about Gaza and about their transgressions, and he lists among the transgressions taking the captivity of Israel and delivering them to Edom. What would Edom want to do with them? Edom hates them, right? Edom's the one who plotted this whole thing out. And so they go in there, they get the gold, the riches, they kill some children, but whoever's left, here, Edom, you do this, whatever you want with them. And we'll learn later in Psalm 137, Edom dashes the children upon rocks. They kill them. No pity, no mercy. There's envy deep inside the Edomites against God's people. We see it over and over again. Okay? And so in Amos 1 verse 9, where we need to go. It says, "Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Tyrus, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they delivered up the whole captivity to Edom." They did it too. So you had Tyrus, you got Gaza, they're all confederate against Israel, and they go in, they get some spoils. Edom says, "Just give me what's left." And so they give the captivity to Edom, and he kills them all. Okay? The Edomites. And so in verse 9 it says, "They delivered the whole captivity to Edom, and remembered not the brotherly covenant." The covenant Tyrus had with Israel, but also there, by implication perhaps, the covenant between brothers of Jacob and Esau. Why would Edom want to kill Israel? They were brothers. Okay, and again, we've seen some of the history here. Down in verse 11, "Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4. So this is specifically against Edom's transgressions. "I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because he did pursue his brother with the sword, and did cast off all pity. And his anger did tear perpetually, and he kept his wrath forever." Why doesn't Edom let it go? Why don't they forgive? Why don't they bless God's people and get a blessing? Instead, they hold on to their wrath forever, and their anger tears perpetually, and they had no pity against Israel. None at all. Okay? And so in verse 12, it says, "I will send a fire upon Teman, which shall devour the places of Bozrah." So here's another prophecy against Edom for an event that Amos is talking about that happened before 2 Chronicles 26, right? Which we've already read in chapter 21, where there's a confederacy against Israel there. Okay, Edom being a part of it. Look at Psalm 137. Now we move from the event in 2 Chronicles 21 where you had King Jehoram, and you had Amos the prophet a little bit later, and you had God's people still in their country there. And though the confederacy came in, had no mercy, took everything, killed all the children, left barely anybody to reign after this, Israel still survived, Judah still survived, and they had kings after that. But we know a time in Israel's history, I speak Israel in the collective here, in Judah's history, where they were attacked by their enemies, in which they didn't even live in their land anymore. Remember that, when they were taken captive by the Babylonians, by the Assyrians, and taken out of their land, and actually destroy the entire city of Jerusalem into rubble. Now Psalm 137 is talking about this context. I know that because of verse 1, when it says, "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept when we remembered Zion." Why are they next to the rivers of Babylon? Because they're slaves. They've been taken there after the Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians came and captured them. Okay, after they came and destroyed them. And so it says in verse 2, "We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof, for there they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion." And so you see the attitude of the enemies here. They destroy the people and then say, "Go ahead, sing us your songs now." Okay, well, let's see what you have to say. "How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land?" The psalmist writes, "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy." He says, "Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, even to the foundation thereof." And so we hear a lot about Babylon and the Assyrians and Nebuchadnezzar coming and destroying Israel, taking them captive into captivity out of their land. And here in Psalm 137, you see Edom had a part of this. And Edom was there encouraging them on. Well, come on, let's raise it. Just don't steal everything. We did that last time. Destroy it. Knock it out. We don't want them to survive anymore. Even to the foundation, verse 7 says, "O daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed, happy shall he be that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us." Remember in Obadiah verse 15 where God says, as thou hast done, it'll be done unto you. Right? Psalm 137, this is what the prayer is. It says, happy shall he be that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us. Happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones. And people say, well, God's just morbid. God just wants to kill children. That's not what he's saying here. It's a description of what they did to them. You see what he's saying? What he's describing is what the Edomites, the Babylonians, did to the Israelite children. And so he's saying, happy shall he be that you get the reward for what you did. And this is what you did. You dashed the little ones against the stones. Okay, so Psalm 137. But again, the point from this passage, just to show you that Edom had a hand in, was involved in the confederacy against Jerusalem when they were taken captive into Babylon. Okay?
All right. I think that's about the halfway point. We'll stop it right there. Boy, the Edomites, they're heartless against their own brother, Esau and Jacob. God changed Jacob's name to Israel. But anyway, I won't get to another Bible lesson and all. But boy, that's pretty bad. All right. Well, I hope y'all are learning from this. I know I am. My family's learning some from this. We'll finish this study up tomorrow, same time. Okay. All right. And then I've said before, if y'all want to finish the lesson, you go to gracemasters.com and you can finish it on up. Don't let me stop you. Yeah, you can finish that up, go on to Malachi, and keep on trucking. If not, you can see my pretty face here tomorrow at 7 o'clock. All right, y'all have a good night. Bye-bye.